Welcome everyone. We are the Block Brothers. My name is Paul Holtz.
I'm Chris Porter.
And we are here today to understand Bitcoin. Easy.
So easy.
Let's dive in.
We really think of Bitcoin as a revolution. It's a revolution in three parts. There's a social component, a technical component, and financial component.
But before we dive in, we really want to ask the question and establish a grounding of what is Bitcoin. Most people will start with a general term of it being a digital currency. But for us, that sells it short in the sense of giving the full picture. So we have three main ideas and characteristics that we attribute to Bitcoin itself. The first is that it is a deflationary currency. And so what this means is that there's a fixed supply, whereas a more traditional government-backed currency, there is not a fixed supply. At the hand of governmental control, there could be the printing and inflation of the money itself. And so when that occurs, a lot of times your wealth or the stability of the region, it isn't in the people's control. So Bitcoin was set from the beginning to be a fixed supply of 21 million Bitcoin.
Why 21 million?
Simply because the founder, the creator, who goes by the anonymous name Satoshi Nakamoto, set 21 million in place.
But do I have to own one whole Bitcoin in order to use it?
So in this sense, there's 21 million Bitcoin, but each one is divisible by 8 parts. So when we talk about transacting, talk about owning, talk about buying, that you don't have to buy a whole Bitcoin in order to own Bitcoin. So to you, what is the distributed public ledger? What is new or different about that?
So if you think of a ledger as just a list of items, I think of the distributed public ledger as a phone book that's spread out across the city. And every person has the same phone book. They have the same information listed. But instead of names and phone numbers, it's just the address of where the money is being sent and the amount. And so this ledger is just simply that. It's addresses and where those are being sent. And the copies of that ledger are distributed worldwide. And every 10 minutes, I think of it as a new page gets added to that phone book. Because it's distributed like that, because there's no one person that holds one phone book that could erase a name and write something else, it also becomes censorship resistant. Because think of a government that might want to shut down, let's say, Edward Snowden, for instance, because they didn't like the things he was saying. There's no single entity that they could go to and say, hey, don't send money to Edward. Well, the US government did say that to PayPal and to other banks, and they agreed, they complied and said, okay, we won't send money to him. Bitcoin, there was no central resource to shut down.
Then what about the cryptography? What revolutionized the capacity for Bitcoin to be secure?
Yeah, so cryptography has been around for years. The thing that made it special in this use case is that it's very easy for the programs to verify the owners without immediately identifying their information. It doesn't have to say Chris Porter. It's just a long string address of my public key, and it's unique. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of the cryptography behind Bitcoin is that it's attack resistant. For many systems that are out there, I think of building a wall around my house. If you wanted to attack my house, or if I wanted to protect my house, I could build a wall, but it might take me 2 weeks to build it, and it might take you only 2 hours to take a sledgehammer and to break a hole through that, right? So that's an asymmetry where it's harder to defend, easy to attack. With cryptography, it's easy to secure and extremely hard to attack. So there's that asymmetry in the right way, in a good way, that helps protect Bitcoin. So it's secure by default.
Let's dive into the social impact of Bitcoin. Now, when we talk about the social impact of Bitcoin, we're not just talking about locally or regionally, but really globally. So if you hear the first part of our talk and you're thinking, well, there's not really that much of a need for it here in my area, as we start to go through these different use cases, think about how this is impacting others here today.
So one of the first aspects would be remittances, sending money from your country to another country across borders. And Bitcoin, I heard it the other day, could really become the global currency because there's no government behind it, and it really can allow payments to be made anywhere in the world without having to exchange many hands.
So what's the positive of that, in contrast to the traditional, what's in place today?
Yeah, so today, because it's changing so many hands, it's very expensive. If you go to Western Union, you might be paying 5, 7, 10% depending upon the amount. I think I saw globally it's 7.14%. Whereas Bitcoin, it's a fraction of a percent to send money.
And in the same way of providing access to people across borders is the actual physical movement of people that are in need that don't have the convenience of accessing their bank to where they're going, or having the capacity to make plans and know that they are going to be on the move. And so Bitcoin and the technology behind it that allows you to access your wallet allows you to not have to have access to a centralized location in order to move your money. And so use cases here today are refugees that may have their wealth and are established income or established savings for where they're from, but then based on the circumstances in their country, are no longer able to remain there. Bitcoin allows the capacity for someone to move without having to start over.
And another important aspect is that it's anti-inflationary. So, in fact, I think we said the word deflationary earlier, right? That there's no government behind it just printing more money all the time. And so, potentially, like years down the road, you'll still have that same amount of Bitcoin, and it will either have increased in value or stayed the same in value instead of knowing that it's decreasing in value every year.
Now you say down the road, but what are some actual use cases of that today? What countries are actually experiencing this?
So in Venezuela, I believe it's Peru, in all these countries where, at least in Venezuela, where there's just an oppressive government and they're printing money and have hyperinflation, people can use it and use cryptocurrency and use Bitcoin instead of their national currency because it is less volatile than their own currency.
Then another story that we've heard through a favorite podcast of ours with Laura Shin, she's interviewing a gentleman who had contact with one of the first women tech CEOs in Afghanistan, and it became a need for her company to be able to pay her employees. The employees who were women didn't have their own bank account, not because of necessarily the bank, but because of the cultural norms. So the husbands, the brothers, the uncles that did not enable women to be able to hold their own money. Bitcoin, because it's your own bank, you could store your own wealth. She was able to pay her employees through Bitcoin. So when we talk about use cases, again, across the world, it's able to serve people that were unbanked for one reason or another. Now, going beyond just a personal level into more of an organizational level, Bitcoin opens up the doors for nonprofits worldwide to accept money. And again, many nonprofits already can accept money, but the capacity to access donors worldwide, to have it easier and faster, again, less fees, really, I think, starts to move things along in a way that just, again, topples the current, all right, pay this payment processor fee, and that's just the way we got to do things. No, it's not the way things have to be done. But beyond just that, simply replacing payment processor fees for nonprofits, there's technology being built with smart contracts that if I were to give a donation, that there would be written into the code, these funds are only going to be released when the nonprofit reaches this milestone, or has completed this step of the project. And so when those type of things can be written into the code, you have more transparency, you have more accountability, and that trust that then can go into not just the annual report that's written a year later, but really in the moment, real time verification. So again, to me, that's an exciting opportunity to grow into, and to hopefully share with all you to help be a part of creating, again, that use case. But there are already organizations that are kind of leading the way, and United Way Worldwide, since 2015, has been accepting Bitcoin.
Well, and it's not just nonprofits, Paul. Businesses can start to use Bitcoin to receive payments, and they get some of those similar benefits where they're reducing fees, right? So we talked about that with remittances, but that's a huge issue for them to not have to pay these fees to some trusted third party like Visa. It's more money in their pockets instead of just in a bureaucracy to move those funds around, right? So Bitcoin's solving that movement problem and getting rid of all these intermediaries. Partially because they're removing those intermediaries and they're distributed, it also means censorship resistance, where a business that wants to accept funds, they can receive funds from anybody that has Bitcoin, right? So I heard a story about people in China that the government-controlled currency, I think what did WeChat?
Yeah, WeChat Pay is a centralized service,
Yeah.
but works closely with the government that could very easily, control who can use the service.
Right.
So how does Bitcoin, solve that?
Right. So because it's not controlled by the government, the business can accept the money, and that person has control because they're their own bank. They have control of their funds instead of having to funnel it through a government-controlled entity. And then the last point on here is that it's cheaper micropayments. So there's a funny site that's out there where it's Satoshi's Place, and there's people doing hundreds of small transactions for less than a penny, buying pixels on this website. And they're actually getting to test some of the aspects of Bitcoin, like real time, and test out these micropayments. And up till now, you've never been able to pay somebody else a fraction of a penny. The fee was more than that fraction of a penny. Well, now with some of the solutions coming out on top of Bitcoin, that's possible.
All right. So you may wonder, where we experience things or come in contact with others who have. These are resources for us that have been inspiration behind, again, the social use case of Bitcoin. So we invite you to connect, to read, to listen to these folks, and then we'll join you next, diving into the technology, your bread and butter.
The context, I think, for this and why you should care enough to listen and to understand parts of this is this difference between the features and the benefits. The features of our cell phones help us to understand how it's all working, but really we don't care about the features. We just care about the benefit of being able to talk on the phone or be able to check Facebook and check the newsfeed really quick. When it matters is when either it stops working or it starts working really slowly, and we're like, why is my phone dropping? Why is the internet so slow? And you look up and you see, oh, it dropped to 3G instead of LTE. So I want to communicate some of the features of Bitcoin to you so you can understand why those are beneficial.
When we break down the technology and really come to, again, talk about its features, we talk about the features as it relates to the different players and the different roles of who's helping to create and to maintain and utilize Bitcoin. And to dive into the first one, as it relates, again, to the technology side and to the impact that Bitcoin is having in its development, nodes, if you remember our first part of the conversation where we talk about a distributed public ledger, is made possible because of nodes. And nodes are simply those distributed copies of the public ledger, of the Bitcoin blockchain, that everyone has the capacity to store and hold on their computer with just a little bit of hardware. And so when we talk about being censorship resistant, being held worldwide, this is you, this is me, holding nodes, running copies of the blockchain on physical hardware that then allows it again to be truly distributed across the world and not just maintained and owned by one central party.
So the next player would be miners. And we were talking about this distributed public ledger and how it's really a phone book. We didn't go into the details of, every 10 minutes there's new transactions happening, and in Bitcoin every 10 minutes those transactions get recorded. I think of that as adding on another page to that phone book. Well, we didn't say who does that, right? Like, this is distributed, it's decentralized. Like, who is adding those, right? Well, it's the miners that are the ones that create that. They take, from the mempool, from like this group of transactions that happen in the last 10 minutes, and they create that page and they add it, and then they distribute that to everybody else. And when they do that, each page you can think of is called a block. So they create that block or that page, and the way they do that is how I'll explain the rest of this, is by running a computationally intense algorithm. Now, if you just had one person creating those pages and telling everybody else, okay, here's the page I created, that's centralized, right? So in order to decentralize it, you need to have it random, who does that. And then the next person that got chosen randomly gets paid for that work that they do, right? So they're running a computationally intense algorithm. The way I think of this is five people sitting around flipping coins. And the algorithm says, okay, you need to flip 5 heads in a row, and the first person to do that earns the block reward. And so they sit around and they flip them, and oh yeah, that should take 10 minutes. And they do it, and to get 5 heads, it only took 3 minutes. And so after a period of time, the algorithm actually says, oh, hey, you're solving that too quick. I'm going to make it 7 coins. I'm going to make it 9 coins. You might imagine computers start getting faster, or if you've ever heard of ASIC computers that were really fast, specific use case computers. Those came out, they made the blocks quicker, then the algorithm automatically adjusted to make it 10 minutes. And so they just added on more coins. It just added on more coin flips that it had to do. Miners are also running this algorithm that's hard to solve, but it's easy to verify. And a picture I like to think of for this is if every transaction was a puzzle piece, the miners could you might tell them, hey, you need to arrange these puzzle pieces into the shape of a crescent moon. Okay, great, now go to work. And so they'd all be sitting there arranging it, and one miner is able to arrange it in the shape of a crescent moon. Everybody else could look at that puzzle and see, yep, he took all the puzzle pieces, they're all arranged correctly, and it's in the shape of a moon. And so that's what I mean by it's hard to solve, but it's easy to verify. And the last aspect is, because it's decentralized, you need somebody to get paid for the work that they're doing. These people are paying for power, they're buying Bitcoin miners, and they're mining, and so it's the cost of the miner, it's the cost of the electricity, and they're not just doing it altruistically. And so they have to get paid for their work. So every time there's a block reward, they get paid for the transaction fees. Even though they're small, they're still there. And today, right now, there's even just a block reward. Just, hey, you got to make a block, well, Bitcoin will just distribute some coins.
Again, that economic model that was set in place to incentivize and to enable to the blockchain to run decentralized really comes into play. Again, when you hear about these different aspects of technology, we hope you're able to start making the connections of how it is working, even if really just focused on the benefits that you receive. Mm-hmm. And one of the cool things about Bitcoin is that it's not just set in stone. And so while there's a fixed money supply and the economic model is in place, the code itself can evolve and grow and get faster and work more efficiently. And beyond just the code source itself being developed and worked on, there's additional solutions being built on top of Bitcoin. And so when you heard us talk about Satoshi's place, it was actually using what's called the Lightning Network to run these microtransactions at a lower cost and a faster transaction speed. That technology is made possible by second layer solutions. And so again, where you might hear of Bitcoin as being like a digital gold, again, that doesn't tell the full picture when you start to realize, man, it's not just staying the same, it's actually growing, evolving, and becoming better and better technology over time. The technology does not start and stop with Bitcoin itself, with the miners, with those that are running nodes. It's you, it's me, it's consumers, that the way we interact with Bitcoin is also evolving. And while today won't be a dive into that particular technology, we want to introduce that type of access is constantly being innovated on as well. So today, the way we access your Bitcoin is going to be through software and hardware wallets. Again, this is the idea that the technology that has been developed enables you and I to be our own bank, to not rely on that central third party, but to gain control. And so when we get this question of what should we invest in, this should be your investment. Learning not just about the space as a whole, but really how to be your own bank, understanding how to set up a software wallet or how to set up a hardware wallet. Again, not the talk today, but that's probably the best investment you can make outside of just learning about Bitcoin and the space as a whole, is learning, okay, if I do make a choice to own Bitcoin, how am I going to secure it? And that's the answer right there. Now, beyond, again, the use case of us as consumers, you're going to have others who are part of advancing the technology in the space. And that comes down into three other actors that we want to introduce and just acknowledge, one being exchanges. So right now, in 2018, you are getting Bitcoin through an exchange like Coinbase. And those are not new and innovative. They are very much like the old system. They're centralized, they're points of failure, they're points of attack, they're points of a hack that have nothing to do with the Bitcoin technology, but just their own capacity. And so we want to look and continue to explore in the space decentralized exchanges that allow true peer-to-peer exchange of coins. And so keep your eye on that in the space, and certainly keep your eye on business services that start to be developed up. You know, what we're doing, what you may be doing working with a business, or as a business itself starting to accept Bitcoin, that the technology that's used as the means of exchange with your customers, those are business services that are constantly and continually being innovated on. And then lastly, regulators. You know, just as a whole, that the technology is something that regulators are trying to get their grasp on. And so take a look at the SEC, see what they're reading. Or we're here locally in Arizona, and it's kind of cool to see what the regulation is being done, actually in a very proponent and positive way, that they understand the technology. They understand the positive impact that this technology can have. And so just again, understanding that it's not just you, or it's not just the developers, that we're all in this together, constantly innovating and working on the technology.
So as always, we have resources that Paul and I both like and listen to or watch. And so we want to, give those to you and to kind of put, two confirmations towards these resources.
When people often think about the impact that Bitcoin has, they think about their own personal wealth, the financial impact it's going to have today or tomorrow. But for us, it's a different question. And for you, it may fall along the spectrum. And so our framework about financial impact is about something much greater than the speculation. But you as a viewer are going to come here from your own point of view. And so you might fall into one of these categories about what financial impact is Bitcoin going to have? Is it going to be bigger than the internet? Is it going to be transformative in terms of what it does for the world? Is it disruptive, but only really more so for the banks? Or is it going to be something more like gold and just purely just a store of wealth and that's it? And then again, going back to the idea of many seeing it as just purely a speculative fad. And there's really no harm in having any of those viewpoints, but for us, and the fire and the excitement obviously puts us in that first category, that this is truly even bigger than something that we can even comprehend. But are we there today? No, certainly not. But there is a reason many see it only as a purely speculative fad, and that maybe is why you came here today. And so when we talk about financial impact, for us, we're not there yet. And that's not to say we'll be there tomorrow, but for us, it does follow this, we call it, like, adoption curve. And this adoption curve starts where we are here today in 2018. Many of you may have come to know Bitcoin and heard about different cryptocurrencies in that rise up in December 2017 into January 2018. And that frenzied stage that has cooled down temporarily, but that's not the end of it. We're still very much in the beginning. And to wrap one thing up and send it on to you, Chris, is this idea that, well, what is this financial impact all about? And to us, it's about creating a new way in which power is held and in which a new financial system can be brought about. And that's why we started with the social impact, because this is tied to money, it's tied to wealth, it's tied to finances, but it's really about this transformation of the system as a whole. But we're not there today.
Yeah. Well, and there's two markets where you're going to see Bitcoin being adopted. So there's the business to business and business to consumer. And right now, the easiest place to see that impact is in business to business. For many of the solutions that Bitcoin can solve, many of the problems that Bitcoin can solve, where it's a business to consumer, it's going to take something called the network effect, right? So if you think of Facebook only works when you have enough people on it. If when it was launched, you went on there and didn't have any friends and didn't know anybody, you'd leave immediately. And so, for Bitcoin, it only works when the other party that you're trying to send the money to is also, has their wallet set up, is using Bitcoin. And so we think that will happen very quickly. Once it does start to happen, then those network effects just grow rapidly. But it's still early, And
then to bring it back to, what does that mean for you? What does it mean for me? In the sense of, well, rather than waiting on that network effect, we really do believe that take hold of your future. Take hold of the power of knowing what's possible with this technology, with the social use case, and with the financial capacity. And so for us, we say your identity, your data, your future, they belong to you. Take ownership. And to us, that is the financial transformation that not only just occurs as a system as a whole, where the distribution of power is decentralized, distributed, but it starts with you taking ownership, taking power today, not waiting on it to happen tomorrow. Then, as with the others, we're greatly inspired to continually be learning ourselves, and we invite you to connect with these resources as great content, again, on that financial side, to really understanding what that power looks like in your own hands, and what does that power look like distributed across the world, to really break us free of what we've always simply known. And I invite you to connect with us on our next talk, and on our next podcast, and our next blog post.
Thanks so much for watching.